Germany's deadliest, most advanced fighter just landed, pristine, on an enemy airfield. No shots fired, no battle, just one pilot's unimaginable mistake that would change the war. This is how Oberleutnant Armin Faber, disoriented and lost, delivered the feared Focke-Wulf F-190, the aircraft slaughtering Allied pilots for months, directly into British hands. And what the Allies discovered inside this invincible machine revealed its fatal flaws, turning the tide of the air war. June 23, 1942. At Pembrey Airfield in South Wales, RAF spotters watched a sleek German fighter descend. It touched down, rolled to a stop, and the pilot emerged. Then his blood ran cold. The aircraft on the flight line weren't Messerschmitts, they were Spitfires. And the sheer, mind-blowing realization that hit Faber in that exact moment was the very same one simultaneously dawning on British intelligence officers all across southern England. Germany's most deadly fighter, the aircraft that had been absolutely decimating Allied pilots for months on end, that mysterious new weapon that seemed utterly invincible in combat, had just been delivered, completely intact, right into Britain. All because a pilot got disoriented and thought he was landing in France. The intelligence windfall? It was absolutely staggering. But what American test pilots would ultimately uncover when they finally got their hands on this incredible aircraft would fundamentally change how every single Allied fighter engaged German planes for the remainder of the war. For 8 grueling months, the Focke-Wulf FW-190 had been a true nightmare, relentlessly haunting Allied pilots across the English Channel. It first burst onto the combat scene over France in September of 1941. And right from its very first engagement, pilots instantly knew they were up against something truly extraordinary. Royal Air Force Squadron Leader J.E. Johnson, who would go on to become Britain's top-scoring ace, actually encountered the FW-190 in early 1942 and barely made it out alive. It was faster than our Spitfire Mark V's in level flight and in the dive, he would later write. It could outroll us. Its firepower was devastating. For the very first time in the war, our fighters were comprehensively outclassed. The cold, hard statistics only reinforced that terror. In just the first 6 months of 1942, RAF fighter losses over France climbed dramatically. Experienced pilots, veterans who had survived the Battle of Britain, were now being shot down by an aircraft they simply couldn't match. The FW-190 could effortlessly dive away from pursuing Spitfires, outroll them with ease in turning combat, and then utterly destroy them with cannons that fired devastating 20mm explosive shells. American pilots arriving in Britain with their powerful P-47 Thunderbolts heard the urgent warnings immediately. Don't engage the 1990 in turning combat. Don't try to outroll it, and whatever you do, don't get into a dive competition. The list of what not to do was alarmingly long. The list of what would actually work, terrifyingly short. Intelligence agencies were desperately crying out for answers. What exactly made this aircraft so incredibly effective? What were its hidden limitations? And crucially, how could Allied fighters possibly counter it? But getting those vital answers meant examining an actual FW-190, and every single example shot down over Britain up until then had been far too damaged to reveal any of its precious secrets. And then Armin Faber made his catastrophic, world-changing mistake. Before we dive deeper, I'd really love to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? And what do you already know about the FW-190? These stories take some serious research to get all the details just right, and knowing you're out there watching makes every bit of it absolutely worthwhile. Oberleutnant Armin Faber wasn't just some rookie pilot. At just 21, he already had multiple victories under his belt and was considered a highly skilled member of Jagdgeschwader 2, the elite Richthofen fighter wing. On June 23, 1942, he was flying a fighter sweep over the English Channel, providing crucial top cover for German bombers hitting coastal targets. The mission itself had gone pretty smoothly, that is, until the return flight. Somewhere over the channel, amidst aggressive maneuvering while locked in a dogfight with British fighters, Faber became completely disoriented. Thick cloud cover obscured the coastline, and the sun's position gave him completely false directional cues. Then, when he finally broke through the clouds and saw a green countryside with an airfield below, his mind made a simple but utterly catastrophic assumption. He genuinely believed he was over France, looking down at a Luftwaffe base. In reality, he was over Wales, staring right at RAF Pembrey. Looking back, this mistake seems almost impossible, but combat disorientation was far more common than militaries ever like to admit. Pilots, flying at incredible speeds through clouds, pulling high G maneuvers that severely affected blood flow to the brain, sometimes just lost all sense of direction. Faber, for instance, had executed a full 180-degree turn during that intense dogfight and simply hadn't realized it. When he landed and finally saw the familiar outlines of Spitfires, Faber desperately tried to restart his engine and take off again, but it was too late. RAF personnel were already swarming his aircraft. Within minutes, he was in custody, and British intelligence officers were meticulously examining the pristine Focke-Wulf FW-190A now sitting right there on their runway. The immediate reaction at RAF headquarters, it was pure euphoria, almost bordering on disbelief. Air Chief Marshal Sholto Douglas, who commanded RAF Fighter Command, instantly ordered the aircraft transported to the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough for exhaustive testing. Every single aspect of this formidable machine was to be documented, measured, and analyzed down to the last rivet. Incredibly, within just 48 hours, that FW-190 was at Farnborough, being meticulously inspected by Britain's absolute top aviation engineers. And what they discovered explained everything Allied pilots had been experiencing in combat. This aircraft was an absolute masterpiece of practical engineering. While the iconic Spitfire truly represented elegant aerodynamic design, the FW-190, in stark contrast, embodied brutal, uncompromising functionality. Its BMW 801 radial engine churned out a staggering 1,700 horsepower, significantly more than the Spitfire Mark's 1470. But raw power wasn't the whole story. The FW-190's most devastating advantage, the one that truly changed everything, was its roll rate. This aircraft could snap from one bank to the other faster than any Allied fighter could hope to. This seemingly minor characteristic was, in fact, absolutely revolutionary in the heat of combat. Imagine a Spitfire desperately trying to keep pace with an FW-190 during rolling maneuvers. It simply couldn't. The German pilot could instantly reverse direction, gain crucial angles, and line up shots before the Allied pilot even had a chance to react. Captain Eric Brown, a legendary British test pilot, flew a captured FW-190 extensively, and he immediately grasped why so many Allied pilots were dying. He reported that the ailerons were incredibly light and responsive at every speed. You could literally throw this aircraft around the sky with almost no effort at all. The Spitfire, by contrast, demanded muscle and finesse from its pilot. The FW-190, he said, responded to thought. The firepower advantage was equally stunning.
The FW-190A3 packed a punch with 4 20mm MG151 cannons and 2 7.92mm machine guns. Think about this. A mere 2-second burst from that arsenal delivered more explosive power than a Spitfire Mark V could generate in 10 full seconds of firing. And those weapons weren't just powerful. They were mounted close to the fuselage in the wings, creating a super tight, devastating concentration pattern at combat ranges. Then there was its dive performance, which brilliantly explained how FW-190s consistently escaped pursuing Spitfires. The German fighter's heavier weight and cleaner aerodynamics meant it could simply outdive anything the RAF flew. Pilots who dared to follow an FW-190 into a steep dive could only watch helplessly as the German aircraft pulled away into the distance. But here's the kicker. Extensive testing also revealed critical weaknesses. And this is precisely where the intelligence value became strategic gold for Allied forces. That powerful radial engine, while fantastic, struggled with cooling at high altitudes. Above 20,000 feet, the aircraft's performance plummeted dramatically. The engine gasped in the thin air, with pilots reporting a significant loss of power and serious overheating issues. Meanwhile, the Spitfire's Merlin engine, specifically designed for high-altitude operations, actually performed better as it climbed higher. That same heavy weight that made the FW-190 a superior dive bomber also made it less agile in sustained turning combat. It could outroll a Spitfire, absolutely, but it couldn't outturn one in a prolonged engagement. If an Allied pilot could force an FW-190 into a sustained horizontal turn fight, the advantage suddenly shifted. Most critically, American engineers made a game-changing discovery. The FW-190's controls became incredibly heavy at high speeds. In a dive exceeding 400 miles per hour, the pilot needed immense strength just to pull out. This created a moment of extreme vulnerability. If an Allied fighter could stick with an F-190 through that initial dive and catch it during the difficult pull-out phase, when the German pilot was literally fighting his own controls, attacks became not just feasible, but deadly effective. Right away, British intelligence started sending out tactical bulletins to RAF squadrons. But they did something else, something that would prove absolutely pivotal for the outcome of the air war. They extended an invitation to American test pilots, bringing them to Farnborough to get their hands on that captured F-190. So, in August 1942, U.S. Army Air Force pilots touched down at Farnborough, ready to closely examine what many considered Germany's secret weapon. These American pilots would eventually head back to their training bases armed with critical knowledge that would, without exaggeration, save hundreds of American lives. Major Cass Hovey, for instance, one of the very first Americans to fly that captured F-190, submitted an incredibly detailed report. This report was then distributed to every single fighter group getting ready to deploy to Europe. His assessment: it was blunt, it was tactical, and it was clear. The F-190 will beat any Allied fighter below 20,000 feet if the German pilot knows what he's doing. Hovey went on to write, "Our advantage is altitude. Above 25,000 feet, our P-47s and later model Spitfires absolutely have the edge. Force them high, and we win. Let them dictate low-altitude combat, and we die." This single crucial piece of intelligence fundamentally reshaped American fighter tactics across Europe. When P-47 Thunderbolt units started their operations in 1943, their entire doctrine shifted to emphasize high-altitude combat. Bomber escorts, for example, flew at their absolute maximum altitude. Fighter sweeps consistently operated above 25,000 feet whenever it was feasible. And when German fighters tried to engage, American pilots would simply climb, forcing the FW-190s to follow them up into that thin, high-altitude air where their engines just couldn't perform as well. But the captured FW-190 didn't just change tactics. It also heavily influenced American aircraft development. Engineers at Wright Field meticulously studied its impressive roll rate advantage, leading them to start modifying P-47 and P-51 ailerons to dramatically improve responsiveness. The FW-190's innovative gun placement directly informed American ideas about weapons concentration. Even the cockpit layout, which German designers had brilliantly optimized for combat efficiency, ended up influencing American fighter design. Yet perhaps the most profound lesson learned was the understanding that the FW-190, for all its prowess, wasn't invincible. It was undeniably an excellent aircraft, but one with very specific advantages and, crucially, exploitable weaknesses. Allied pilots, who had previously felt somewhat intimidated by the 190's fearsome reputation, now possessed concrete, actionable information on exactly how to fight it and, more importantly, how to win. By late 1943, the entire tactical situation had shifted dramatically. American P-47s and P-51s were now confidently engaging FW-190s at high altitude, precisely where Allied fighters held the decisive advantage. So, how did things change? Well, the RAF's Spitfire Mark IX, now with those upgraded Merlin engines, could really go toe-to-toe with the FW-190 across most altitude ranges. Pilots on both sides understood they were flying different beasts, each optimized for specific conditions. But here's the kicker. The kill ratios started swinging hard in the Allies' favor. FW-190 losses began to mount, all thanks to American and British pilots expertly exploiting the intelligence they'd gained from Faber's captured aircraft. German pilots, like the high-scoring ace Oberleutnant Josef Pips Priller, noticed it. By late 1943, he commented that Allied fighters were no longer making those crucial tactical blunders that had given the FW-190 its early dominance. "They've clearly studied our aircraft," he wrote in his combat journal. "They know not to follow us into rolling scissors. They force us high, where our engines struggle. They've learned." This captured FW-190 wasn't just a trophy. It stayed at Farnborough throughout the entire war, becoming a vital reference point. Whenever new German variants, like the FW-190D9 Dora with its inline engine, popped up in late 1944, Allied intelligence immediately compared them to Faber's plane. They instantly grasped how German designers had tried to fix the original's high-altitude weaknesses. After the war, aviation historians crunched the numbers, revealing the true impact of Faber's mistake. The insights from that perfectly intact FW-190 were shared with thousands of Allied pilots through tactical bulletins, training films, and even live demonstration flights. This knowledge wasn't just theoretical. It shaped aircraft development, tactical doctrine, and operational planning across multiple air forces. Captain Eric Brown, who flew more captured enemy aircraft than any other Allied pilot, put it perfectly. Faber's navigation error gave us the Rosetta Stone for understanding German fighter design. Every tactical advantage the FW-190 possessed was documented, and every weakness was exploited. That single aircraft probably saved more Allied lives than any intelligence coup of the war. The irony of it all certainly wasn't lost on German intelligence when they finally pieced together what had happened. One Luftwaffe officer reportedly quipped, "We spent months trying to capture a Spitfire Mark IX intact so we could study its improvements. The British didn't have to try. We delivered our best fighter directly to them." As for Armin Faber himself, he spent the rest of the war in a Canadian prisoner of war camp. He survived, returned to Germany, and lived until 1976. Luftwaffe records, interestingly, suggest he was initially blamed for the loss of that invaluable aircraft.
Now, later on, assessments actually acknowledged that combat disorientation, well, that could happen to any pilot. The real head-scratcher, though, was why German intelligence had ever assumed the British would never get their hands on an intact FW-190. The whole saga of Faber's captured fighter delivers an absolutely crucial lesson about the very nature of technological advantage in wartime. When it first burst onto the scene in 1941, Germany's Focke-Wulf FW-190 truly represented a quantum leap in fighter design. For nearly a full year, it absolutely dominated Allied aircraft thanks to its superior performance and incredibly innovative engineering. But that formidable advantage? It completely evaporated the instant Allied engineers got to truly examine the actual machine. You see, no aircraft is ever truly invincible. Every single design involves compromises and trade-offs. The FW-190's incredible dominance at low altitude, for example, came at the direct cost of its performance at high altitudes. Its excellent roll rate? That came with somewhat heavy controls at high speeds. And its powerful armament, while devastating, added weight that ultimately reduced its maneuverability. Once Allied pilots really grasped these fundamental trade-offs, they could then exploit them. Today, the FW-190 is rightly remembered as one of World War II's truly great fighter designs. Aviation museums proudly display surviving examples as masterpieces of German engineering. But the aircraft's legendary reputation is absolutely inseparable from the intelligence coup that ripped open its secrets. In the incredibly complex calculus of wartime advantage, one pilot's momentary disorientation over the English Channel essentially transformed Germany's cutting-edge secret weapon into an open book. The Fra 190 that Armin Faber accidentally delivered to Britain became, quite literally, the aircraft that taught the Allies how to win. That lesson, it truly echoes throughout all of military history. Superior technology? Yes, it absolutely matters. But superior intelligence? That matters even more. And sometimes, the very greatest victories don't come from devastating attacks, but from simple, seemingly minor mistakes that hand your enemy exactly what they've been desperately searching for. The Focke-Wulf FW-190 could have remained an enigma, an invincible opponent that continued to slaughter Allied pilots through psychological advantage as much as sheer technical superiority. Instead, it was transformed into an invaluable teaching tool that every single Allied pilot studied, learned from, and ultimately defeated. One navigation error, one landed aircraft, one intelligence windfall that fundamentally changed the air war over Europe. That's precisely how America got its hands on Germany's secret fighter. And that, my friends, is how a single, seemingly small mistake fundamentally shifted the balance of power in the skies.